Bernard Arnault is the richest man in the world. In the prestigious Forbes ranking, he is currently the fourth richest man in the world. It all began with the sale of his father's inheritance, a joint construction company. A fascinating game of big business was ahead of him. Bernard Arnault's life is like a fairy tale. His fortune is $72 billion. He is in the top 5 of the Forbes list. Today there is no one richer than this man in Europe. French billionaire Bernard Arnault is one of the most silent rich people of our time. He probably knows that silence is golden. Bernard Arnault's calculating nature and his desire to know more and apply it to his business. The desire to know more and apply it to his business is the reason for his success. Biography: The City of Roubaix. Bernard Arnault was born in Roubaix on March 5, 1949. The city of Roubaix is located almost on the border between France and Belgium. Here the family of the future industrialist had a small house. It was a construction company called Ferret-Savenol. His father and grandfather intended to raise their son as an heir to the business. From the age of 7, they took him with them to construction sites. After school, Bernard studied engineering at the École Polytechnique in Paris. However, 25-year-old Arnault Jr. did not dream of working in construction. Naturally, at first he worked for his father's company, where he also held the position of managing director. But then everything changed dramatically. And after the closure of the company, the founder himself faced this fact. At that time Bernard had other plans. He wanted to go to the USA. Arnault returned from the USA with a large baggage of theoretical knowledge. He was mainly interested in mergers and acquisitions, M&A. It did not take long before he had a chance to prove himself in practice. Bernard bought the textile conglomerate from the state and became the owner of Bussac. His initial capital came from the proceeds of the sale of the company and a bank loan. With this money, the protagonist bought shares, first from management, partly from his first wife's relatives, and then from the state. Thus Bernard Arnault, the egg of the business shark, wanted to acquire Bussac before Louis Vuitton. First, however, Arnault set out to recapitalize the company. By increasing the amount in its bank account, the company began to consider another scenario. Could an industry be created to produce high-priced goods? Many of the companies acquired under Bussac had been sold to Arnault, but Christian Dior could not make up his mind. The company needed renewal, and Bernard began to study the theory of the textile business. And indeed, the new owner first of all replaced the chief designer of the fashion house Gianfranco Ferré with a young John Galliano. And he was right, ultramodern design breathed new life into Dior. Dior's profits multiplied. Couture's rival was the so-called instant fashion. Its founder, Amancio Ortega, is worth learning more about. In 1989, Arnault acquired a 24% stake in LVMH, i.e. access to Hennessy, Louis Vuitton and Moët brands, for $1.8 billion. In 1990, Arnault owned 43% of the shares and was the chief industrialist of LVMH. Moët Hennessy Louis Vuitton, and cleaned up the company by firing all the executives without exception. He fired the top management entirely and took over the company himself, appointing his father as chairman of the board. The transformation of Louis Vuitton is interesting. Originally, the company specialized in the production of shoes and travel bags. To revitalize the company, Arnault invited Marc Jacobs, who took over the production of ready-to-wear, and Takashi Murakami, who redesigned the LV logo and created a colorful line of bags. It was a very wise decision. It is always more expensive to promote each premium brand separately than to have them in one conglomerate. From a purely strategic standpoint, the merger also prevented the company from fragmenting. These developments led to the creation of the Arnault Empire. This rich Frenchman did not just revive the companies he bought out. He raised them to the level of super profitable organizations. In one interview he said, "I guarantee the indestructibility of the brands I buy. This tactic worked, and today LVMH, and therefore Bernard Arnault, owns these famous companies. Today, LVMH, and Bernard Arnault, controls fashion sharks such as Berluti, Guerlain, Celine, Givenchy, Kenzo, Loewe, jewelry brand Fred and Swiss watch company Tag Heuer. The status of high-end alcoholic beverages such as Pommery, Dom Perignon, Krug Veuve and Cliquot has also improved considerably. The emperor has no intention of stopping and is constantly expanding his holdings. The Frenchman left the following statement: "I guarantee that in 100 years I will still be drinking Dom Perignon." Arnault is also no stranger to new technologies. He invested his share in the internet company Europatweb. Online trade in clothing is also flourishing in Russia. The story of Tatiana Bakarchuk, founder of Wild Belize, is instructive. The country also has its own media. Invest and Tribune, financial topics. Connaissances des Arts, art. Classique, radio station. Big, owner of the television channel TF1, in which he has a 10% stake. Even the impeccable Arnault has had his share of punks. In this context, Gucci's history is particularly telling. In the 1980s, Gucci, the Italian luxury goods maker, was in complete decline. Arnault first wanted to buy the company, but he was not convinced by the too high price. However, Arnault was also not satisfied with the too high price and tried to convince the company's management, but they did not agree to the terms. Arnault began to rebel. This happened because the company was registered in the Netherlands. He went to court in the Netherlands. The reason for the lawsuit was poor management at Gucci. However, the party that filed the lawsuit threatened to strike for dilution of capital and issued 20 million shares. This share had Bernard Arnault's stake. And the manager of Gucci de Sol sold 40% of his shares to François Pinault, a longtime rival of the protagonist, who was spectacularly forced out of the race. In 1987, this wealthy Frenchman tried to start his own label, Christian Lacroix. At first, the house planned to produce haute couture models. Then they moved on to a ready-to-wear line. However, this strategy proved to be completely unworkable. In 2005, Bernard Lacroix sold the company, and a few years later it went bankrupt. This case forced Arnault to refrain from creating a brand from scratch. You may be interested to know about the world's most expensive clothing brand. In 2012, he thought about obtaining Belgian citizenship. It was his reaction to the authorities' promise to raise taxes to 75% for the richest oligarchs in France. His passion for art is closely linked to his philanthropy. Arnault sponsors numerous art galleries. Students with disabilities at the Academy of Fine Arts are under his patronage. He spends a lot of time looking for talents in business and art. Yes, and Bernard himself has a large collection of paintings from the Renaissance. The businessman not only has a taste for classical music, but is himself a skilled pianist. Moreover, his second wife was the famous Canadian pianist Helene Mercier. The philanthropist Bernard Arnault has met many musicians, but his friendship with the violinist Vladimir Spivakov is especially well known. Bernard became legendary thanks to a gift he made to his friend for his birthday. It was a case for a Stradivarius violin. The gift lay in a desk drawer as if it were a piece of jewelry. In fact, it was meant to hold trivia and important documents, which is very useful when traveling. French oligarchs built a contemporary art center. It became one of the cultural landmarks of the French capital. The building looks like a ship with sails. Concerts and performances of famous ensembles and musicians are held there. Among them are the Moscow Virtuosi under the direction of Vladimir Spivakov. People of French blood inevitably become foodies. Arnault is no exception. He loves rare steaks and chocolate cake. What the oligarch protagonist does not like, however, is cannibalism. Even his closest people call him "you," sometimes even in whispers. And it's very hard to expect him to smile. Bernard does not like to be the center of attention. He does not like to speak in public and often refuses to be interviewed. Bernard Arnault, a leading manufacturer of luxury goods, is one of the richest men in the world, and probably the richest Frenchman. This is confirmed by the prestigious Forbes ranking, in which the Frenchman is ranked fourth. Arnault's fortune is currently estimated at $72 billion. 2 of his 5 children play an important role in the future division of Arnault's empire. They are his son Antoine, born to his first wife in Devabren, and daughter Delphine. There is an unspoken struggle between them over who will run LVMH after their father. The heirs are so different that it is already interesting to watch their confrontation. Let's start with Antoine, who runs Berluti. Antoine was trained in finance from an early age by his father. Antoine himself began his career by selling Louis Vuitton handbags in his father's company. In character, he is very different from his reserved father. Many admire his excellent communication skills. It was he who persuaded Mikhail Gorbachev to star in a Louis Vuitton commercial. The commercial, by the way, won the Cannes Lions Award. Despite being an outgoing actor, Antoine is very quiet. This quality helps him excel at poker, the prize fund of which has already reached $6,000. Model Natalia Vodianova gave him 2 sons, Maxim and Roman. The couple lives in Paris and is active in social and public activities. They also take care of the education of their 5 children. The older 3 are from Vodianova's previous marriage. Delphine Arnault-Ganchia began working as a perfume saleswoman in a Dior boutique. Not so long ago, she became vice president of Louis Vuitton. This position is very responsible, as the brand transfers more than half of its profits to her father's empire. Bernard's daughter received an excellent education in French and British business schools. Delphine rose quickly in the business world. In 2003, she became a director at LVMH. For the next 5 years, she was deputy director of Christian Dior Couture, where she had sales growth. Many believe she inherited her father's business acumen, and that her introverted daughter's temperament also came from him. The same pianist, Helene Mercier, gave her 3 other sons: Jacques, Frederick and Alexander. As observers of family prophecies, they are actively involved in all future business families. Their father often arranges Saturday excursions for them, during which he teaches the younger ones to pay attention to details for Arnault. However, the oldest heirs believe that their fathers will not be stepping away from the business anytime soon. At least in 15 years, everyone will still have time to prepare. And Arnault himself never gets tired of repeating that he never wanted to make a lot of money, but to be creative and strive for perfection. Perhaps that is the main secret of his success story.